They thought it was nothing more than a heap of rust, a useless relic of an old woman's past. The car, worn and weathered, was mocked as junk, unworthy of space in the driveway. Behind her back, whispers grew louder until one day, in a cruel act of betrayal, it was sold off for scrap. To the world, it was just an eyesore. To her, it carried decades of memories, her late husband's touch, her family's milestones, her own sacrifices etched into every dent and scratch. Yet none of them cared. Their laughter rang louder than her protests, as though stripping her of the car stripped her of dignity itself. What they never knew, what no one could have imagined, was that hidden deep within that worthless shell lay a secret. A single document, carefully concealed, that had the power to turn ridicule into regret and shame into utter shock. To anyone else, the car was nothing but a faded shell, its paint chipped, its engine coughing through each turn of the key. But to her, it was more than a machine. It was a companion, a silent witness to her life's most intimate journeys. She remembered the day her husband surprised her with it. His hands still smelling faintly of oil and leather polish, his smile wide with pride. It wasn't brand new, but it was theirs earned through sacrifice, hours of overtime, and the promise of building a future together. That car carried them on countless road trips. The windows rolled down as their children's laughter spilled into the wind. Summers meant sandy seats and melting ice cream dripping onto the dashboard. Winters meant blankets in the back seat and songs hummed to keep spirits high while the heater groaned. Each dent bore a memory. The tiny scratch from her son learning to drive the bent fender from a narrow escape in the rain. The faded upholstery softened by decades of use. It wasn't just transportation, it was security. When bills piled up and food felt scarce, the car became their lifeline, carrying her husband to double shifts, delivering her children safely to school, and giving her the strength to believe tomorrow might be brighter. It was her reminder that dignity didn't need to gleam, it could sit quietly in the driveway, steadfast and unassuming. While holding the fragments of a family's history, neighbors often teased her about keeping it for so long. But she didn't mind. Every morning, when she brushed the dust off the hood, she wasn't polishing metal, she was tending to memories. Sitting in the driver's seat with her hand resting on the steering wheel, she could still hear her husband's voice, feel the echo of laughter that had long since faded from the house. So when her children and relatives looked at the car and saw only junk, they weren't just dismissing an old vehicle. They were dismissing her life's story, the sacrifices she had made, and the love she had poured into every mile driven. To her, the car was not clutter. It was her dignity, her anchor to a past that still breathed within her heart. It started quietly, almost harmless at first, passing remarks disguised as concern. "Mother, that old car is just taking up space," one nephew said one evening, its eyes lingering on the rusted hood, as if it were a stain on the family's image. Another chimed in, "You deserve better than this heap. Why don't you let us handle it for you?" Their words dripped with false kindness, masking the impatience simmering beneath. She smiled softly, unwilling to quarrel. To her, the car was untouchable, a sacred vessel of memories. But to them it was an eyesore, a reminder of a past they neither valued nor respected. Soon their tone sharpened. Jokes turned into taunts. "It's practically scrap already." A cousin laughed at a family dinner, his voice loud enough to stir embarrassment. "No one drives something that ancient unless they're too poor to buy new." Laughter followed, shallow and cruel. At first, she dismissed it, leaving that beneath the arrogance lay the love of family. But small gestures betrayed their intentions. Keys went missing from their usual spot. She once found her nephew inspecting the car's tires, whispering to another relative with a smirk. Her heart sank, realizing their fascination wasn't with her safety, but with ridding themselves of what they saw as junk. The betrayal deepened with subtle exclusions. Conversations about family finances conveniently left her out. She overheard whispers about how much scrapyards paid for old metal, how freeing the space would make the house look more modern. They weren't just dismissing her car, they were dismissing her voice, her authority, her place in the home she had built. In moments of solitude, she would sit in the car, her hands tightening around the steering wheel, as if anchoring herself against the storm brewing within her own family. She longed to believe their words were careless, not malicious. Yet their smirks, their growing boldness, and their arrogance painted another truth. They had already begun planning her loss. Every remark chipped away at the fragile bond of trust she still held. The seeds of betrayal had been planted, watered, by greed and impatience, and though she tried to shield her heart with silence, she could already feel the roots of their intentions winding around her cherished memories. To the family, the car was a relic, outdated, rusty, and unworthy of sentiment. But to her, it was a testament to survival. Every scratch on its body carried a story. Every dent held a memory. It was not just a machine. It was the quiet companion of her struggles, vessel that had weathered storms alongside her. She had purchased it decades ago when money was scarce, after saving coins in a small tin for years. While others flaunted luxuries, she settled for this modest car, pouring into it not just her earnings, but her hopes for stability. When she drove it home, children cheering in the back seat. It wasn't just transportation, it was proof of her determination. Her refusal to give up when life seemed relentless. Through hardship, she kept it running. When her husband fell ill, she drove it daily to the hospital, its wheels carrying her through nights of silent prayers. When finances crumbled, she resisted selling it, choosing instead to fix it herself, tightening bolts with hands roughened by labor. That car had been witness to sacrifices no one else remembered. The nights she chose to skip meals so she could buy fuel. The mornings she traded comfort for resilience. To her, its worn seats weren't shabby, they were sacred. The steering wheel had felt her tears of exhaustion and her sighs of relief. The faded paint was more than corrosion. It was a badge of endurance. She had clung to the car not out of vanity, but because it embodied dignity, perseverance, and a love for the family that now dismissed it so easily. Yet there was something more, a reason she guarded it with an intensity no one could quite understand. For within the car lay a secret beyond sentiment. She had hidden a document inside, carefully sealed and tucked away in a compartment no one suspected. A document that bore the weight of everything she had worked for: investments, properties, and a fortune accumulated silently over decades. Her family saw the car as worthless metal. She knew it was a vault of legacy. The irony gnawed at her, watching them laugh at what they could not fathom. Every time they called it scrap, she felt both hurt and vindicated. For one day, the truth would come to light, and their mockery would turn to silence. But until then, she protected it with quiet reverence. She polished its hood when no one was watching, not out of pride, but to honor what it carried within. The car was not just about memories, it was about resilience wrapped in steel, dignity wrapped in rust, and a legacy wrapped in secrecy. Unbeknownst to them, the old machine they scorned held the key to a future they could not imagine. And though she bore their mockery in silence, her heart carried a quiet promise: when the time was right, the car would speak for her, louder than any words ever could. The day they sold the car felt like a wound torn open. She woke to silence in the driveway, the familiar shape missing. Her heart sank before words could form, an instinctive ache that told her something terrible had happened. When she asked, their response came not with remorse, but with smirks. It was useless. One of them said casually, "We sold it for scrap. You should thank us for clearing the junk." The word junk struck deeper than any blade. To them, it was a worthless pile of rust. To her, it was decades of blood, sweat, and dignity reduced to nothing in a single heartless decision. She stood frozen, her lips trembling, yet no sound came out. Their laughter filled the room, each chuckle echoing her humiliation. She wanted to scream, tell them what the car truly carried, but the words died on her tongue. Instead, she bore the pain in silence, the same silence that had carried her through countless storms. They mistook her restraint for weakness, laughing louder, as though mocking her tears was another form of entertainment. One of them joked, "You should have thanked us before you got too old to drive. Better someone makes a few bucks than let it rot." Another chimed in, "It probably wasn't even worth the gas it burned." Their cruelty was not just in the act, but in the glee they found in diminishing her. They looked at her as though she were a relic too, just like the car, outdated, unnecessary, and disposable. Her chest tightened as she clutched the edge of a chair to steady herself, forcing her tears not to fall in front of them, but inside grief raged. She remembered the nights spent polishing its hood, whispering prayers while tightening loose screws, safeguarding not just a vehicle, but her life's story and the secret within. Now, without her consent, they had stripped it away, dismissing her devotion as foolishness. The arrogance on their faces made her ache not just for the car, but for the family she once believed stood for love. They had betrayed more than her trust. They had mocked her very existence. Yet even in that moment, amidst the humiliation, she chose restraint. She would not beg for their understanding, nor stoop to their level, for she knew something they didn't. The car they sold so carelessly carried more value than they could ever comprehend. And while they gloated over a few bills earned from scrap metal, she clung to the quiet truth that one day their arrogance would shatter under the weight of what they had thrown away. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strength, sharp and steady, waiting for its moment to strike. The story of the car's disappearance did not stay within the walls of her home. Like smoke rising from a hidden fire, whispers carried it through the neighborhood, weaving their way into conversations at tea stalls, grocery lines, and family gatherings. Everyone seemed to know that the old woman's beloved car had been sold for scrap, and the tale became a cruel form of entertainment. Some neighbors shook their heads with pity. "Poor soul," one murmured. "She clung to that car as if it were family, and now even that has been taken from her." Their voices held sorrow, but also resignation, as though betrayal was inevitable for someone in her position. Others, however, smirked. It was just junk. They laughed. What dignity is there in holding on to scrap metal? Maybe her children did her a favor. Their words stung more than silence, for they mocked her loss as if it were a comedy among relatives. The whispers grew sharper. At gatherings, people no longer asked her opinion. Instead, they exchanged glances, subtle nods, and hushed remarks when she entered the room. The car had been her pride, a piece of her identity, and now, stripped of it, she was treated as though she had lost her last claim to significance. Respect that once lingered in their tone now evaporated, replaced with pitying sighs or outright dismissal. At night, the elder sat by her window, staring at the empty driveway where her car once stood. The loneliness pressed heavily on her chest, like an unseen weight she could not shake. Every sound of a passing engine reminded her of what she had lost, not just metal and paint, but decades of memories, struggles, and victories bound within it. The betrayal was not in the sale alone. It was in how quickly others turned her grief into gossip, how swiftly respect dissolved into ridicule. In their eyes, she was now powerless, reduced to a figure of scorn. A woman who had clung to sentiment instead of practicality. And yet, beneath the sadness, a quiet ember glowed. The community may have judged her, relatives may have whispered, but they did not know the truth. The car was more than they imagined. It had carried something they could never laugh away, a hidden legacy, a document that would one day rewrite everything. For now, she endured their whispers with bowed head and steady silence, allowing their arrogance to grow unchecked, because she understood a truth that none of them could see. Betrayal has its season, but so does justice. And when her season came, every smirk, every whisper, and every cruel laugh would turn into stunned silence. Long before her family's cruelty revealed itself, the elder had carried within her a wisdom forged through years of hardship. She had seen enough of life to know that affection can sour, loyalty can bend, and greed can disguise itself in smiles. It was not paranoia that guided her, it was foresight. The quiet kind that never announced itself but always worked patiently in the background. That foresight had led her to place something extraordinary within the car they so easily dismissed. Tucked carefully in a compartment, no one bothered to check, lay a folder worn on the edges but strong in its purpose. Inside were deeds to properties, certificates of investments, and inheritance papers, documents that represented not just wealth, but security, dignity, and the preservation of her life's work for years. She had kept this secret quietly, tending to the car not only out of love, but also as a guardian of what it carried. Each time she polished its mirrors or checked the engine, she was also safeguarding the fortune hidden within. To the family, it was just an old machine rusting in the driveway. To her, it was a vault, holding the power to transform futures. Her wisdom was not to flaunt or to warn, but to wait. She understood that people reveal their truest selves when they believe you have nothing. And so she allowed them to see her as vulnerable, sentimental, even naive. She allowed them to laugh at her attachment, to mock her insistence on keeping what they thought was worthless. All the while, she held her silence, knowing that one day, their arrogance would hand them their own downfall. At night, she would sometimes sit in the car alone, running her hand over the steering wheel, whispering softly as though to an old friend. In those moments, she drew comfort from the knowledge that while the world thought her powerless, she was anything but. The car was her witness, her confidant, her secret weapon wrapped in steel and memory. When they sold it for scrap, betrayal cut deep, but her heart held more than sorrow. It carried suspense, a steady drumbeat of certainty that the truth could not remain buried forever. Documents as powerful as those she had hidden do not vanish. They resurface, often at the most unexpected time, and so she waited. The whispers, the laughter, the pity, all of it became background noise to her quiet patience. She did not need to argue or to shout, for the truth had already been set in motion years before. She had prepared for this very moment, and though her family believed they had stripped her of everything, they had, in fact, only walked into the snare she had set with her foresight. The car might have left her driveway, but the story it carried was not finished. Its journey was leading toward revelation, and with it, justice. The moment of revelation did not arrive with thunder or spectacle. It came quietly, like truth often does, slow, steady, undeniable. Days had passed since the car was sold, each one weighed down with the heaviness of betrayal. The family moved about with smug satisfaction, certain they had rid themselves of the relic that tied the elder to her stubborn sentimentality. They spoke of progress, of clearing space, of finally moving forward. In their eyes, she was left powerless, diminished, stripped of her last connection to pride. But destiny has a way of bending toward truth. At the scrapyard, the old car sat among twisted metal and rusting frames, awaiting its dismantling. It was there, as a mechanic pried open the glove box and reached deeper into a hidden compartment, that the discovery was made. A folder, carefully sealed, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from time, emerged from the shadows of steel. Its contents, deeds, investments, inheritance papers shimmered, not with gold, but with the weight of undeniable power. The scrap dealer, stunned, paused before discarding it. A glance at the names, the seals, the sheer gravity of what he held, and he knew this was no ordinary bundle of papers. The documents were too valuable, too official, too deliberate. Respect stirred in him where curiosity had first sparked. And so he contacted the one name most clearly written on the documents, the elder's lawyer. When the lawyer arrived, calm and precise, He handled the folder as though it were a sacred relic. He had known of these preparations, though even he had not expected them to resurface this way. He returned to her with the folder in hand, his voice steady but laced with something triumphant. "It seems," he said, "that what they thought was gone forever has only returned stronger." The family gathered soon after, drawn by whispers of some strange discovery. They entered the room with casual arrogance, still confident that she had no fight left in her. Their faces bore the same smirks. Their voices carried the same dismissive tone. "What could possibly be left?" one of them sneered. "The cars. Gone. She has nothing now." It was then the lawyer placed the folder on the table. Silence fell. One by one, eyes widened as the truth unfolded. Titles to properties. Records of investments that had grown quietly over decades. Legal documents ensuring her authority remained untouched. The figures written on the pages were staggering millions, not scraps. The elder sat in her chair, composed, her face calm but her eyes alight with quiet fire. She did not gloat, did not shout. Her dignity was the sharpest blade of all. "You thought the car was just metal," she said softly, "but it carried more than you could ever imagine. You sold my memories for nothing, and in doing so, you revealed yourselves." The greedy shifted uncomfortably, their confidence crumbling. The one who had led the betrayal, once so loud, now could not meet her gaze. Whispers of shame rippled across the room, heavier than any accusation. They had mocked her, stripped her of respect, and now stood exposed small in the shadow of her foresight. She leaned forward, her voice steady, each word cutting through the silence. "Wealth is not measured by what you see, but by what you prepare for. You thought me weak, yet I was stronger than all your arrogance combined." In that moment, the power shifted entirely. No longer the frail elder mocked for her sentiment. She stood as the quiet victor, her patience and wisdom triumphant over cruelty. Their humiliation was complete, etched into their bowed heads and silent lips. The revelation was more than about money, it was justice. Her dignity had survived, her foresight had prevailed, and the family, once drunk with arrogance, now faced the bitter taste of their own betrayal. In the stillness that followed the revelation, the house felt transformed. The arrogance that had once filled the air had drained away, leaving behind silence heavy with shame. For the elder, it was not triumph she felt most strongly, but reflection. She had endured mockery, endured betrayal, and yet she had chosen patience over retaliation. And now, with the truth laid bare, she could finally weigh what the ordeal had meant, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. Her mind returned again and again to the cruelty of those days. The laughter when her cherished car was dismissed, the dismissive smirks, the casual arrogance with which they spoke of her as if she were nothing. Those moments had cut deeply, not because of their words alone, but because they had revealed something darker. The greed that had poisoned hearts she once trusted. Betrayal, she realized, is never about the act itself. It's about the fracture of trust, the shattering of something once whole. And yet, through that pain, she recognized another truth. Arrogance blinds. It had blinded them to the depth of her resilience, to the strength of her silence, to the foresight she had hidden in plain sight. They had been so consumed with the illusion of her weakness that they never stopped to wonder if her quietness might carry more weight than their scorn. In their haste to dismiss her, they revealed their own smallness. Some of the family, however, had not been blinded. She recalled the quiet ones, the grandson who had draped an extra blanket over her shoulders, the daughter who spoke gently even when others were sharp. They had not defended her openly, perhaps out of fear, but their subtle kindness had not gone unnoticed. Now, after the revelation, those same relatives approached her with humility in their eyes. They offered not excuses, but apologies, not just words, but gestures that showed remorse. She welcomed them, not with bitterness, but with grace. For she knew that reconciliation is not born from pride, but from sincerity. The greedy ones, though, found no such comfort. Exposed in their arrogance, they retreated into silence and isolation. Their eyes no longer held confidence, but shame, though some still clung to anger, blaming fate rather than their own actions. To them, she offered nothing more than truth. Respect cannot be bought, and betrayal once committed leaves scars that no inheritance can heal. Their isolation was not her punishment, it was the natural consequence of their own choices, as she reflected. She saw clearly that her true victory was not the millions revealed, but the dignity preserved. Money may have silenced their laughter, but it was her foresight that had written the ending. Preparation, patience, resilience, these had been her weapons all along. And they had proven stronger than cruelty. She thought of the younger ones, watching with wide eyes as the truth unfolded. To them, this moment was more than a family dispute. It was a lesson carved in memory. Arrogance will always blind you, she told them gently one evening. But patience sharpens the eyes, and preparation quiet. Steady preparation can carry you through storms others cannot endure. Her words were not grand speeches, but quiet truths, the kind that linger long after they are spoken. And so the family shifted. Bonds rooted in sincerity grew stronger, while ties tainted by greed fell away. The house once heavy with whispers found new warmth, not in noise, but in honesty. The elder, no longer mocked, no longer pitied, stood as a figure of quiet strength, a reminder that dignity cannot be stolen. And foresight always outlives arrogance. For her, the lesson was simple but enduring. Cruelty may win moments, but patience wins lifetimes. And though the scars of betrayal remained, they no longer pained her. They had become, instead, the proof of her resilience and the legacy she would leave behind. In the end, the memory of their laughter still echoed. They had called her foolish for clinging to what they dismissed as scrap. They mocked her sentiment, ridiculed her silence, and convinced themselves that they were wiser, stronger, more practical. Yet the very object they scorned, the car they reduced to worthless metal, had carried within it the truth that undid their arrogance. What they failed to see was that her attachment had never been blind nostalgia. It was foresight wrapped in resilience. She had hidden her legacy not in a bank vault, but in a place they would never respect. And in that single decision, she had preserved both her dignity and her power. When the truth was revealed, it was not only wealth that surfaced, but justice. Their mockery crumbled into shame, and her silence transformed into triumph. But the elder understood that the millions were never the true reward. Money could build houses, buy luxuries, and silence doubters, but it could not erase cruelty or restore broken trust. What mattered more was the lesson. That dignity endures longer than wealth, that foresight triumphs where arrogance falters, and that resilience carries a strength no betrayal can defeat. For those who had supported her quietly, reconciliation brought healing. For those who had mocked her, isolation was the mirror of their own greed. And for the younger eyes watching, the story became a warning. Never mistake silence for weakness, nor humility for defeat. As she sat in the stillness of her home, no longer mocked, no longer pitied, she felt at peace. The betrayal had been painful, yes, but it had also revealed truth with a clarity no comfort ever could. She had not only secured her legacy, she had secured a lesson that would outlive her. True wealth, she realized, is not hidden in documents or possessions. It is woven into resilience, guarded by dignity, and shaped by foresight. And that, more than millions, was the inheritance she left behind.